They told me Nathan's brakes failed on Route 49. They told me it was rain and bad luck. But I spent 35 years landing planes in crosswinds that would make God nervous. I know what mechanical failure looks like, and I know what sabotage smells like. The moment Serena locked me in that cellar, I stopped being a grieving father. I became the black box she forgot to destroy. Welcome to the story. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from and what you would do if the person who destroyed your family was sleeping right above your head. Do not forget to like and subscribe. Note, this is a fictional story with dramatized elements, but it carries a meaningful and thoughtful message. The first thing I saw was not my daughter-in-law's face. It was Nathan's leather flight jacket hanging over the porch railing like a discarded skin. I, Frank Donovan, a 70-year-old retired Delta Airlines captain who spent 3.5 decades keeping 400 souls alive at 37,000 feet, never expected the most catastrophic failure of my life to happen on solid ground. My truck rolled to a stop in front of our Colonial on Dilworth Road, and the November air hit my lungs like decompression at altitude. The funeral was still clinging to my suit. The chemical sweetness of lilies and embalming fluid threaded into the wool. We had buried Nathan James Donovan, my only son, my co-pilot in everything that mattered, exactly 4 hours ago, 39 years old, dead on a rain-slicked curve because his brakes supposedly gave out on the way home from Charlotte Douglas International. I stared at the house. Something was wrong with the picture. The geometry of it. Like an instrument panel where one gauge is off by a single degree, and your gut screams Mayday before your brain can do the math. There was a truck in the driveway that did not belong to anyone in my family. A black Ford Raptor with mud on the wheel wells and a bumper sticker that read "Built Tough." The tailgate was down, and a man I had seen only twice before was carrying Nathan's desk chair through the front door. Not out. In. Blake Harmon, 41 years old. Former aviation maintenance technician. Fired from Piedmont Airlines 3 years ago for falsifying inspection records. I knew his name because Nathan had mentioned him once in passing, calling him Serena's friend from the gym. I knew his face because I had watched him stand too close to my daughter-in-law at the funeral reception, his hand resting on the small of her back, with the casual ownership of a man who had been there long before today. My boots hit the gravel, and the crunch sounded like static on a dead radio frequency. I walked toward the porch, and that is when I saw the rest of it. Cardboard boxes, stacked without care, their flaps open to the biting wind. My flight logs. 40 years of meticulously recorded approaches, departures, and emergency landings reduced to a cardboard grave on a November porch. My uniforms. My photographs with crews from Tokyo to Heathrow. Eleanor's crystal vase, the one she kept on the hallway table for 30 years until the cancer took her 6 years ago. They were throwing me out. On the day we buried my son, I reached the front door just as Blake emerged again, his arms loaded with my winter coats. He had the dead-eyed look of a man performing a task, not a crime. He did not even pause when he saw me. He simply sidestepped, as if I were a piece of furniture he had already decided was not worth keeping. "Get out of my way, old man," he muttered. The words were casual, practiced. The voice of someone who had been told he owned this space. I stepped inside, and the house smelled different. It smelled like Blake's cologne and something chemical, like fresh paint over rot. Serena Calloway Donovan, my 37-year-old daughter-in-law, stood in the kitchen doorway. She wore black from the funeral, but her posture was not that of a grieving widow. It was the posture of a woman who had just closed a deal. "Frank," she said, her voice carrying the synthetic warmth of a flight attendant delivering bad news. "We need to talk about the living situation." Behind her, through the kitchen window, I could see the backyard where Nathan used to push Emma and Grace on the swing set. The swing moved gently in the November wind, empty. "What is the meaning of this, Serena?" I asked, keeping my voice level. 35 years in the cockpit teaches you that panic is contagious and calm is a weapon. Why is that man carrying my belongings out of my home? She tilted her head, and I saw it. The same micro-expression I had seen on co-pilots who were about to lie on a flight report, a flicker of rehearsal behind the eyes. "You have not been well since Nathan's accident, Frank." The girls are frightened of your episodes. The shouting at night, the confusion. Blake is here to help with the transition. We are moving you to the basement. It is temporary. Just until we find you a proper facility. I have never had an episode in my life, I said, the taste of copper rising on my tongue. And this is my house. Serena smiled. It was the worst smile I have ever seen. Pilots retire, Frank. This house needs someone who can still stand on 2 feet. Nathan would have wanted the girls to feel safe. From upstairs I heard it, a sound that ripped through my composure like a bird strike through a turbine engine. Emma and Grace, my 8-year-old granddaughters, were crying. Not the soft whimper of tired children. The raw, ragged sobbing of little girls who had lost their father this morning and were now watching a stranger move into his room. I took 1 step toward the stairs, and Blake's hand caught my shoulder from behind. His grip was mechanical, impersonal, like a clamp securing cargo. He spun me toward the basement door, and I saw Serena watching with those calculating eyes, her arms crossed, her weight shifted to one hip. She was timing this. She had planned the exact moment. The basement door yawned open behind me, breathing cold air from below like the throat of something ancient and hungry. A pilot trains for the moment gravity becomes the enemy. We practice emergency descents in simulators until the muscle memory is etched into our nervous systems. But no simulator prepares you for the feeling of your own family shoving you into the dark. Blake's hand tightened on my shoulder, his fingers digging into the joint where my rotator cuff had been repaired 8 years ago. He knew exactly where to press. The pain was instant and electric, shooting down my arm like a current through bad wiring. I tried to plant my feet, but the threshold of the basement door was narrow, and my dress shoes from the funeral had no grip on the smooth hardwood. He did not push me hard. That was the calculated part. It was a measured shove, just enough to exploit the angle of the staircase and the surprise of the impact. A maintenance technician understands force vectors the same way a pilot understands lift. Blake understood exactly how much pressure it takes to send a 70-year-old man stumbling down 12 wooden steps without leaving a bruise that looks intentional. I caught the railing with my left hand, but momentum carried my body forward and sideways. My right shoulder hit the concrete wall halfway down, and I heard something crack. Not bone, the drywall. My weight punched a shallow crater into the plaster as I tumbled the last 4 steps, landing on the cold cellar floor, in a heap of funeral wool and bruised dignity. The pain bloomed across my ribs like turbulence shaking through a fuselage. I lay there for 3 seconds, the metallic taste of adrenaline flooding my mouth, staring at the exposed rafters above me. Dust motes floated in the thin shaft of light from the doorway, suspended like debris after a decompression. Then the light disappeared. The door swung shut with a heavy finality, and the deadbolt engaged with a sound I will carry in my bones until I die. Click. Lock. Sealed. The darkness was immediate and absolute. Not the gentle dimness of a bedroom at night, but the pressurized blackness of a cockpit at 40,000 feet with every instrument gone dark. I lay still, breathing through my nose, counting my heartbeats the way I used to count seconds during an engine failure drill. 1, 2, 3. Assess the situation. 4, 5, 6. Identify your resources. Then I heard her. Emma's SOS came through the door like a blade through sheet metal, high and ragged and broken. Pop, pop. Pop, pop, please. Let him out. He did not do anything wrong. The sound of small fists hammering against the other side of the basement door was the worst sound I have ever heard in 70 years of living. Worse than the fire alarm in a cockpit. Worse than the silence after Eleanor's heart monitor flatlined. My granddaughter was beating her hands raw against a locked door because the only safe person left in her world was being sealed beneath her feet. Then Serena's voice, sharp as a depressurization whistle. Emma Donovan, you get away from that door right now. Grandpa is sick. He needs to rest. If you go near that door again, I will take away the airplane. The airplane. Nathan's model, Boeing 747, that he built with the girls last summer. Their most treasured possession. Serena was using it as a leash. The small fists stopped. I heard the shuffle of slippered feet retreating, and then the muffled sound of a child sobbing through a closed bedroom door 1 floor above me. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the vacuum after an explosion, the moment before the secondary blast. I sat up slowly, my ribs protesting with every breath. The cellar air was cold and thick, carrying the smell of old motor oil, damp concrete, and something else underneath. Something chemical and sharp that I could not yet identify. The darkness pressed against my eyes like a physical weight. My hand found the wall, and I followed it until my fingers caught a pull string. I tugged, and a single bare bulb clicked to life overhead, casting a cone of sickly yellow light that barely reached the corners of the room. I squinted, letting my eyes adjust, and began my assessment. Every pilot who survives a crash does the same thing in the first 60 seconds. You check yourself for injuries. You check your environment for exits. You check your resources for survival tools. The order never changes because panic fills every gap that procedure leaves empty. Injuries. Right shoulder throbbing, possibly a deep bruise or minor separation. 3 ribs on the left side tender but not broken. A shallow cut on my forearm from the railing bolt. Survivable. I have landed worse. Environment. The cellar was roughly 20 by 30 feet. Poured concrete floor with a drain in the center. Block walls on 3 sides. The fourth being the foundation of the original house. 1 window, high and narrow, barely 12 inches tall, covered with grime so thick the November moonlight could not penetrate. A wooden workbench along the far wall. Metal shelving units. A water heater humming in the corner. The furnace, clicking and groaning like an old aircraft engine in need of service. And there, on the workbench shelf, half hidden behind a can of wood stain, I saw something that made my pilot's heart quicken. Nathan's toolbox. The red metal one with the dented corner that he had owned since his first apartment. Serena had not thought to take it because she did not understand its value. To her it was junk. To me it was a survival kit. I moved toward it, my steps slow and deliberate on the gritty floor. The cold was already seeping through my funeral suit, biting at my ankles and wrists. I opened the toolbox lid, and the smell of machine oil and steel rose up like a greeting from my son. Wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, electrical tape, and beneath the top tray, something that did not belong with the rest. A small black prepaid phone, still sealed in its plastic packaging, tucked beside a folded piece of paper in Nathan's precise handwriting. 2 words. Just in case. My throat tightened. My son had been afraid. Afraid enough to hide an emergency phone in the one place he knew I would look if things went wrong. How long had he known? How many nights had he lain awake in the room above me, planning escape routes for a crash he saw coming? I pressed the phone against my chest, feeling the hard rectangle through my shirt like a second heartbeat. The cellar was dark and cold, and smelled of things I did not yet understand. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim yellow light, my pilot's instinct did what it always does in a crash. It started looking for the black box. In the cockpit, we call it a scan pattern. Your eyes move across the instruments in a fixed sequence, left to right, top to bottom, never skipping, never assuming. You trust the gauges, not your feelings. Feelings will tell you the aircraft is level when you are in a 40-degree bank descending at 3,000 feet per minute into a mountain. The instruments do not lie. They cannot. I applied that same discipline to my concrete prison. Through the night, I cataloged everything within reach. The workbench held Nathan's toolbox, 3 cans of wood stain, a jar of mismatched screws, and a roll of duct tape so old the adhesive had yellowed. The metal shelving unit against the north wall contained Christmas decorations, a broken humidifier, and a plastic bin of Nathan's old engineering textbooks from his days studying aeronautical design at North Carolina State. The water heater occupied the northeast corner, its pilot light casting a blue ghost flicker against the block wall. And above it, running along the ceiling joists and disappearing into the floor above, was a network of old galvanized ductwork, the heating vents, the ones that connected this cellar to every room in the house. I filed that observation away. A vent is just a vent until you need it to be an ear. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling above me and the distant, muffled rhythm of Blake's heavy footsteps crossing what used to be Nathan's bedroom. Each footfall was a violation. Each creak of those floorboards was a theft happening in real time. I lay on the old camping cot I had unfolded from behind the furnace, my right shoulder pulsing with heat, and I counted the steps. 12 paces from the bedroom door to the bathroom. 8 paces from the bathroom to the stairs. The geography of my son's life, now walked by the man I was beginning to suspect had ended it. Morning arrived as a thin gray line across the filthy basement window. I heard the kitchen come alive above me, the hiss of a coffee machine, the clink of ceramic. Then footsteps on the basement stairs, lighter than Blake's. Measured, deliberate. The deadbolt turned, and Serena appeared at the top of the steps carrying a wooden tray. She descended slowly, her face arranged into an expression of maternal concern, so practiced it belonged on a stage. She wore yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than 37. Softer, less dangerous. That was the point. "Good morning, Frank." She set the tray on the workbench with careful precision. "I made you oatmeal. And your coffee. 2 sugars. Just how you like it." She paused, tilting her head with that rehearsed sympathy. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep?" I watched her hands. In 35 years of flying, I learned to read people the way I read weather radar. You watch the hands, not the mouth. Her fingers were steady. No tremor. No guilt. She arranged the napkin beside the bowl with the geometric precision of someone who had practiced this scene in the mirror. "I slept fine," I said. My voice was flat, controlled. I did not give her anger, because anger was what she wanted. Anger would confirm her story. Anger would make me the unstable old man she was already describing to whoever would listen. "Good," she smiled. "Eat something. You need your strength. The girls asked about you this morning. I told them you are resting, that you need quiet." She lingered for a moment, her eyes scanning the cellar the way a predator checks the perimeter of a cage. Then she turned and climbed the stairs, pulling the door shut. The deadbolt engaged behind her with that same clinical finality. I looked at the oatmeal. Steam rose from the bowl in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of brown sugar and cinnamon. The coffee was dark and rich, exactly as she described. 2 sugars. Just how I like it. She had paid attention. She had learned my preferences the way a good co-pilot learns the captain's habits, not out of love, but out of operational necessity. I lifted the spoon and brought a small amount to my lips. The oatmeal tasted normal, sweet, warm, comforting. But beneath it, barely perceptible, was something else. A faint chemical bitterness hiding under the brown sugar, like the ghost of a dissolved tablet. The kind of taste you would miss entirely if you were hungry and grieving and not paying attention to your instruments. I swallowed that single bite. Then I stopped. I set the spoon down and stared at the bowl the way I would stare at a fuel gauge that just dropped 10% in 5 minutes. Something was not right with the mixture. I poured the remaining oatmeal into the floor drain, watching the thick beige slurry disappear into the dark. The coffee followed. I rinsed the bowl with water from the utility sink and placed it back on the tray, arranged to look partially consumed. A pilot who suspects instrument failure does not continue flying on those instruments. He switches to the backup system, and he waits for confirmation. That confirmation came 12 hours later. By evening, I realized something extraordinary. My mind was clear, sharper than it had been in weeks. The fog that had been settling over my thoughts since Nathan's funeral, the confusion I had attributed to grief, the moments where I lost words mid-sentence, the heaviness in my limbs that made me stumble, it was all lifting, evaporating like morning frost under a direct sun. I had not felt this alert in 20 days. 20 days since Nathan's death. 20 days since Serena began preparing all my meals with such devoted attention. The realization landed with the weight of a collapsed landing gear. She had been drugging me, Not since yesterday. Since the funeral, perhaps before. Every meal she lovingly prepared. Every coffee she brought with that concerned smile. Every glass of warm milk she insisted would help me sleep. All of it had been laced with something designed to make me slow, confused, and compliant. Something designed to make a sharp-minded pilot look like a man, losing his cognitive function. I waited until the next morning, when Serena brought fresh garbage bags to replace the basement bin liner. She took the old bag upstairs without a second glance. But she did not know that I had already searched it in the dark hours before dawn. My fingers had found them nested between wet paper towels and an empty yogurt container. 3 small blister packs, each one punched through. The pharmaceutical printing was tiny, but the basement bulb was bright enough to read the word etched into each foil cavity. Halcyone, triazolam, a powerful benzodiazepine sedative. In therapeutic doses, it induces sleep. In accumulated doses over weeks, it mimics cognitive decline, memory loss, confusion, and disorientation. It mimics exactly the symptoms Serena was describing to justify my commitment to a psychiatric facility. I was not losing my mind. I was being chemically erased. My daughter-in-law was not caring for me. She was building a paper trail of manufactured insanity, one dissolved tablet at a time. A pilot who knows his instruments are being tampered with does not panic. He switches to backup systems. And my backup system was already a phone call away in Detroit. My sister Patricia had spent 30 years investigating crashes for the National Transportation Safety Board. If anyone could read the wreckage of my son's death and find the mechanical fingerprints of sabotage, it was her. Every commercial aircraft is equipped with a cockpit voice recorder. It captures every word spoken in the flight deck, every alarm, every breath of the crew, stored in a fireproof casing designed to survive temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees and impact forces that would flatten a car into a coin. The purpose is simple. When everything goes wrong, the truth survives. It waits in the wreckage for someone patient enough to listen. I found my cockpit voice recorder on the second night. It was not a device. It was a gap. The galvanized ductwork running along the ceiling joists was original to the house, installed in 1978 when the Colonial was built. Nathan and I had discussed replacing it during the renovation 3 years ago, but Serena had insisted the budget go toward the kitchen remodel instead. Now I understood why the old system remained. The ducts were wide, uninsulated, and connected the basement directly to the kitchen above through a single vertical shaft. Every sound that traveled through that metal channel arrived in the cellar with startling clarity, like pressing your ear to a stethoscope and hearing the heartbeat of the house itself. I discovered this by accident. It was past midnight on my second night in the cellar. I was sitting on the camping cot, back against the cold block wall, turning the prepaid phone over in my hands, but not yet willing to power it on. Not until I knew more. Not until I had something concrete to report beyond the paranoid suspicions of a drugged old man. Then I heard it. The refrigerator door opening. The metallic crack and hiss of a beer can. Then another. Then a third. Blake's voice came through the duct with such clarity that for a disorienting moment, I thought he was standing beside me in the dark. I moved silently across the concrete floor, positioning myself directly beneath the vent intake where the shaft made its vertical run into the kitchen. I pressed my back against the wall and tilted my head, letting the sound funnel down into my ears like an approach frequency coming through a headset. Blake was drunk. Not stumbling drunk, but loose. The kind of alcohol-fueled confidence that makes small men feel large and dangerous men feel invincible. He was talking to Serena, his words slightly slurred at the edges but perfectly comprehensible through the metal channel above my head. "Stop worrying about it," he said. The hiss of another beer opening punctuated his words. "I told you, it was clean. Cleaner than Knoxville." My blood went cold. I pressed harder against the wall, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Serena's voice was lower, controlled, but the duct carried it just the same. "I am not worried about the car. I am worried about him." She meant me. "He is sharper than you think, Blake. Even with the Halcyon, he watches everything. He counts things. He times things. It is like he is still in that damn cockpit. Blake laughed. A wet, guttural sound that echoed through the ductwork like something rotting. He is 70 years old, and he thinks his brakes failed in the rain. Everyone thinks that. The mechanic signed off on it. The police signed off on it. Even the insurance company signed off on it. You know why? Because a clean cut on a brake line looks exactly like wear and tear if you pack enough road grime over the splice. That is Maintenance 101, baby. No trace, no flag. Clean job. I gripped the edge of the workbench so hard my knuckles cracked. The sound of my own blood rushing through my temples was almost loud enough to drown out the next words. Almost. How long until the commitment papers go through? Blake asked. The casual tone of a man discussing a home improvement project rather than the institutional burial of a human being. Serena's response was clinical. 2 weeks, give or take. Dr. Morrison needs at least 3 documented episodes of confusion. We have 2 already from the emergency room visit last week, and the Halcyon will give us a 3rd by Friday. Once the judge signs off, we file for power of attorney the same day. Then the house goes on the market. How much? 680,000. Maybe 700 if we stage it right. Plus the insurance payout on Nathan clears in January. 2.5 million. She paused, and I heard the sound of liquid being poured into a glass. Something heavier than beer. Celebratory. We book the flights the day the house closes. Costa Rica does not extradite. Blake whistled low. And the kids? The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them the way I count seconds during a go-around. Each one heavier than the last. The system will handle the kids, Serena said finally. Her voice carried no weight, no hesitation, no maternal warmth. She said it the way a pilot says fuel dump. A necessary procedure to reduce weight before landing. My granddaughters. 8 years old, motherless in practice, fatherless by murder, and soon to be abandoned to a state foster system by the woman who was supposed to protect them. While Serena sipped wine on a Costa Rican beach, purchased with their dead father's blood money, I did not move for a long time after their voices faded, and the footsteps retreated upstairs. I sat in the dark beneath that vent, the cold concrete numbing my legs, the metallic taste of rage and grief and something harder than both coating the inside of my throat. My son did not die in an accident. He was murdered by the man now sleeping in his bed. The brake lines were cut with the surgical precision of a man who once maintained aircraft for a living, a man who had done it before. Knoxville. Blake had mentioned Knoxville with the casual familiarity of a professional reviewing a past project, and I had exactly 14 days before they buried me alive in a psychiatric ward and vanished with everything my son had ever built. 14 days before Emma and Grace became wards of the state, forgotten by the mother who was supposed to love them and abandoned by a justice system that never knew they existed. 14 days. In aviation, that is 201,600 seconds. I had wasted enough of them already. I reached for Nathan's toolbox in the dark and pulled out the prepaid phone. My fingers trembled as I peeled the plastic wrapping free. The screen glowed to life with a pale blue light that turned the cellar walls into something resembling a cockpit at night. Cold, focused, ready. In aviation, when you are going down, you do not call your family. You call the tower. You call the people with the radar, the people who can see what you cannot, the people trained to guide you through the darkness to a safe landing. My tower was Patricia. The phone felt heavier than it should have. A few ounces of plastic and circuitry, but in that moment it carried the entire weight of my family's future. I held it beneath the camping cot blanket. The blue screen glow contained to a small dome of light that would not reach the window. Above me, Blake's snoring came through the ductwork in a thick rumble. The predators were asleep. I dialed Patricia's number from memory. 40 years of flying teaches you to memorize the numbers that matter because there are moments when you cannot reach for a contact list. The ring pulsed 4 times. Then her voice came through, sharp despite the hour. Frank? What is wrong? Patricia Donovan Walsh had spent 3 decades with the National Transportation Safety Board, pulling truth from twisted metal and charred flight recorders. She did not sleep deeply. Investigators learned to keep one ear open because wreckages do not wait for business hours. I kept my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia, I am in the basement. They locked me in the cellar. Nathan was murdered. His brakes were cut. Blake Harmon did it. And Serena helped plan the whole thing. I told her everything. The halcyon. The vent. Blake's confession about the brake lines and the word Knoxville. The commitment papers. The 14-day timeline. The Costa Rica flight. And the 4 words that had shattered me. The system will handle the kids. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, the line was quiet. Then she exhaled. A sound I recognized. It was the same exhale she made when she found the cause of a crash. And the cause was human. Frank, I am not surprised. What do you mean? I ran a preliminary check on Blake Harmon 2 days after the funeral. Something was wrong at that service. Serena's grief was performative. Textbook, actually, which is the problem. Real grief is messy. Hers was choreographed. And Blake, standing at the back of the chapel, checking his watch every 6 minutes, told me everything about his relationship to time and patience. You already suspected, I whispered. Suspecting and proving are 2 different altitudes, Frank. So I called in a favor with a colleague at the Charlotte field office. I requested the accident reconstruction report from Highway Patrol. And her next words landed with the precision of a controlled demolition. Frank, I have read over 400 brake failure reports in my career. Real failures have a signature. The hydraulic fluid depletes gradually. The wear pattern follows a predictable curve. Nathan's report matches none of those patterns. The fluid loss was total and immediate. The failure point is too clean, too localized. It is as if someone took a surgical instrument and made a single cut at the exact stress point where it would hold under normal braking, but fail catastrophically under sustained pressure. Like a long downhill grade in heavy rain, I said. Exactly like Route 49. The cut was designed to hold through city driving. Light taps would feel normal. But the moment Nathan needed sustained pressure on that mountain curve, the line ruptured completely. No warning. Total loss at the worst possible moment. I pressed my forehead against the cold block wall. Blake had not just cut a brake line. He had engineered a failure mode. He had used his aviation maintenance training to create a delayed onset catastrophe. Nathan would have felt safe for the first 20 minutes of his drive. It was only on Route 49, where the descent dropped 600 feet in 2 miles, that the truth revealed itself. He has done this before, Frank. Patricia's voice hardened. I cross-referenced Blake Harmon through the NTSB database. 5 years ago, in Knoxville, Tennessee, a 34-year-old man named Curtis Dellinger died in a single-vehicle accident. Mountain Road. Brake failure. His wife was dating Blake within 3 months. Case closed as mechanical failure. Serial, I whispered. The word tasted like metal filings. Pattern behavior, Patricia corrected. Here is what we need. The accident report gives me suspicion, but not a conviction. I need to examine the brake line cut under a microscope. Tool marks are like fingerprints. If Blake used aviation snips, the compression pattern will be distinct from road debris damage. The car is at Eastway Salvage, I said. 3 miles from here. Then we need that car. But more than that, I need you alive. Do not eat anything she gives you. Do not confront them. Play the confused old man she is creating. Can you do that? I spent 35 years playing calm when engines were on fire. I can play confused. Good. I am flying to Charlotte Thursday evening. We work this like any crash investigation. Methodical, sequential. Keep this phone hidden. Keep yourself alive. The line went dead, the blue glow extinguished. I was alone in the dark, but it felt different now. Not burial. Preparation. Then I heard it. A sound so faint it could have been the house settling. But I knew this house. I knew the pitch of every creak, every thermal expansion snap. This was none of those. It was the slow, deliberate pressure of weight against the cellar door hinge. Not opening. Testing. Someone was checking whether the lock held, checking whether I had gotten out. I killed the phone's background glow and held my breath. The pressure on the hinge held for 10 seconds. Then it released with a barely perceptible sigh of wood against wood. Footsteps retreated. Light. Measured. Not Blake's heavy tread. Serena. I sat motionless, pulse hammering against my temples, wondering if she had heard the murmur of my voice through the floor, wondering if my 14 days had just become something much shorter. The morning after Serena tested the lock, I woke to a sound that did not belong in the predatory silence of that house. It was soft, hesitant, the barely there whisper of bare feet on wooden stairs, each step placed with the exaggerated caution of someone trying to become invisible. I sat up on the cot, my body rigid, every nerve tuned to the frequency of that sound. It was not Blake's heavy construction boots. It was not Serena's measured stride. It was something smaller, something lighter, something that weighed no more than 50 pounds and was descending into my darkness with the terrified courage of a child who knows she is breaking a rule that carries consequences. The deadbolt had not turned. The door remained locked. But the sound was inside the stairwell, which meant someone had unlocked it from above and pulled it open just far enough to slip through. I heard the faintest click of the latch re-engaging from the inside. Whoever this was had locked themselves in with me. A small shadow appeared on the fourth step. Mismatched pajamas. One sock on, one foot bare. Hair uncombed and falling across a face that looked too thin for an 8-year-old. Emma Donovan stood there, clutching something against her chest, her eyes wide and luminous in the yellow glow of the single basement bulb. Pop pop. Her voice was barely a breath, a whispered frequency too low for the ductwork to carry upstairs. Are you awake? I am here, sweetheart. Come down. She descended the remaining steps in a rush, her bare foot slapping the cold concrete as she crossed the distance between us and crashed into my arms. I caught her, feeling her small frame shaking against my chest. She was cold. Her skin carried goosebumps from the November air in the stairwell, and her fingers dug into my shirt with the desperate grip of a child who has been told that the last safe person in her world is disappearing. I held her, rocking gently, the way I used to hold Nathan when the thunderstorms shook this house and he was too proud to admit he was scared. My shoulder screamed from the bruise Blake had left, but I did not let go. There are pains that matter, and pains that do not. This one did not. You should not be down here, Emma. I whispered into her hair. If Mommy finds out. Mommy is sleeping. She took her own medicine last night. The white pills. She will not wake up until the alarm. Emma pulled back, looking up at me with Nathan's brown eyes. Eyes that carried too much knowledge for their age. Pop, Pop, I need to tell you something. About Daddy. About the morning he left. My chest tightened. I knelt down to her level, taking both her small hands in mine. The concrete was brutal on my knees, but I needed her to see my face, to know she was safe. Tell me, honey. Whatever it is, you can tell me. Emma's lower lip trembled. She glanced toward the stairs, the reflexive check of a child trained to watch for approaching authority. Then the words came out in a tumbled rush, as if she had been holding them behind her teeth for weeks, and they had finally grown too heavy. The morning Daddy left for the airport, Mommy made him special coffee. She said it had extra vitamins because he was tired from working late. But I watched her make it. Pop, pop. She put something in it from a little brown bottle she keeps in her purse. Not the sugar. Something else. She stirred it for a long time. I kept my face perfectly still. 35 years of delivering calm to panicking passengers. 35 years of smooth voice and steady hands while alarms screamed and engines burned. What happened after Daddy drank the coffee, Emma? He got really sleepy. Like, really, really sleepy. His eyes kept closing at the breakfast table. He almost fell asleep in his cereal. And when he went to the car, he was walking funny, like his legs were not working right. Mommy said he was just tired from his project. But Pop Pop, his hands were shaking when he held the steering wheel. I saw it through the window. Grace saw it too. My vision narrowed. The basement walls seemed to constrict around me as the full architecture of Nathan's murder assembled itself with sickening clarity. Serena had not just arranged for Blake to cut the brakes. She had drugged Nathan's coffee that same morning, sedated him before putting him behind the wheel of a car she knew had no stopping power. Even if, by some miracle, he had noticed the brake failure early enough to attempt evasion, his reflexes would have been too impaired to execute it. She had built redundancy into the kill, a backup system for murder. Emma was not finished. She pressed closer, her voice dropping even lower. And Pop, the night before, I woke up because I heard a noise in the garage. I looked out my window, and I saw that man, the one who is in Daddy's room now. He was under Daddy's car with a flashlight. He was there for a long time. I told Mommy in the morning, and she said he was just checking the oil because Daddy asked him to. But Daddy never asked anyone to touch his car. He always said pilots do their own pre-flight. Pilots do their own pre-flight. Nathan's words, coming back to me through his daughter's mouth like a transmission from beyond. I pulled Emma into my chest again, feeling her heartbeat flutter against my ribs. A small bird in a cage built by her own mother. Pop, Mommy told us you are going away to a hospital. She said you will not remember us anymore. She said we might go live with different families. Her voice cracked on the last word. Is that true? Are you leaving us? I held her tighter, pressing my lips against the top of her head. The smell of her children's shampoo mixed with the damp concrete air of my prison. I made a promise then, not to God, not to justice, to this child. Nobody is taking me anywhere, Emma. And nobody is taking you or Grace anywhere. I promise you that on Daddy's name. She nodded against my chest, her breathing slowly steadying. After a moment she pulled back, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I have to go back before the alarm. She started toward the stairs, then turned. Pop? Grace knows more. She saw Mommy with the brown bottle other times too, but she is too scared to come down here. I will keep you both safe, Emma. Go now, quietly. She disappeared up the stairs like smoke, the door clicking softly behind her. I sat on the cold concrete floor, my back against the cot frame, staring at the ceiling where my granddaughters slept above a killer. Serena had not just murdered my son. She had drugged him into helplessness before sending him down a mountain road with no brakes. It was not just murder. It was a double execution disguised as weather. And my 8-year-old granddaughter had been carrying the evidence in her small, terrified body for 3 weeks because the only adult she trusted had been locked in a basement and fed pills to forget his own name. Patricia called at 0200 the following night, as promised. I had spent the day performing the role of my life. When Serena brought the morning tray, I let my hands tremble. I called her Eleanor twice. I stared at the wall with the vacant fog of a man whose mind was dissolving. She watched me with those calculating eyes, and I watched her pupils dilate with satisfaction. The pills she believed I was consuming were doing their work. The confused old man was right on schedule. But in the dark, with the phone pressed to my ear and Blake's snoring rumbling through the ductwork above, I was sharper than I had been in decades. Adrenaline and fury are extraordinary cognitive enhancers when the alternative is death. I told Patricia everything Emma had revealed. The coffee, the brown bottle, Nathan's shaking hands on the steering wheel, Blake under the car with a flashlight, the dual redundancy of the kill. Patricia was silent for a long moment. Drugging him before the drive, she said finally. That is not just premeditation. That is engineering a guaranteed fatality. Even if the brake failure had been survivable at that speed, his impaired reaction time would have made evasion impossible. She built a closed system. No exit. No survival variable. I know, I said. My son was dead before he turned the ignition. Patricia shifted into full investigator mode. Her voice became clipped, efficient. Frank, I finished my detailed analysis of the Highway Patrol reconstruction report. The brake line failure occurred at the left front caliper junction. The official report attributes it to corrosion fatigue. But here is what they missed. The cut surface shows a compression pattern inconsistent with environmental degradation. Natural corrosion creates an irregular, pitted edge. What I am seeing in the photographs is a clean lateral compression followed by a shear. That is a tool mark, Frank. Specifically, it is consistent with diagonal cutting pliers applied at a 45-degree angle to the hydraulic line. Aviation snips, I said. Close. Diagonal cutters. Standard in any aviation maintenance toolkit. Blake would own 3 or 4 pairs. The genius of it is the placement. He made the cut at a junction point where road debris naturally accumulates. Then he packed grit and mud over the splice to mimic months of wear. Any mechanic doing a standard post-accident inspection would see the debris field and assume the line failed from prolonged environmental exposure. You would need a metallurgist with a scanning electron microscope to distinguish the tool mark from natural stress fracture. But it can be distinguished, I pressed. Absolutely. Under magnification, the crystalline structure at the shear point will tell us whether the failure was gradual fatigue or instantaneous mechanical force. If it is the latter, it is not an accident. It is homicide. And Frank, I called my contact at the FBI field office in Knoxville this afternoon. What did you find? Curtis Dellinger, age 34. Died August 19, 2019. Single vehicle accident on Route 441, outside Gatlinburg. His Toyota went off a mountain curve after apparent brake failure. His wife, Lauren Dellinger, began a relationship with Blake Harmon approximately 11 weeks later. They separated after 7 months when Blake became violent. Lauren filed a restraining order. Case was never reopened because there was no evidentiary trigger. Until now. A pattern, I said. The word felt like a rivet locking into place. 2 is a coincidence. 3 makes a serial offender, Patricia said. And I intend to give the Bureau their 3rd data point. But I need physical evidence from Nathan's vehicle. Specifically, I need that brake line section preserved. Where is the car? Eastway Salvage. Off Central Avenue. 3 miles east of here. Good. Now listen carefully. I cannot access that vehicle without a court order, and I cannot get a court order without more than my professional opinion on a photograph. We need that dashcam, Frank. The word stopped me cold. Then it ignited something. A memory so sharp it cut through the fog of grief and sleeplessness with surgical precision. Nathan's voice. 3 weeks before the accident. We had been standing in the garage, the smell of motor oil and cold concrete around us. He was leaning against the fender of his Camry, his arms crossed, his expression carrying a weight I had not understood at the time. Dad, I installed something in the rear view. Just in case. I had thought he meant a standard dash cam. The kind every cautious driver buys from Amazon. I had nodded and said something dismissive about technology and moved on to talking about the Panthers game. I had not pressed him on why he said just in case. I had not asked what he was afraid of. I had failed to hear the distress call buried inside a casual sentence. Patricia, I said, my voice tight. Nathan told me 3 weeks before he died that he installed something in his rearview mirror. He said just in case. The same words he wrote on the note he left with this phone. He was building a record. A dash cam disguised as a rearview mirror, Patricia said. Smart. If it was recording on the night Blake accessed the vehicle, we have visual evidence of the sabotage in progress. That is not circumstantial, Frank. That is a conviction. It is at Eastway Salvage, in a wrecked Camry, 3 miles from this cellar. The silence between us was charged. I could hear Patricia's breathing, steady and calculated, the same breath pattern she used before delivering a final report to a grieving family. Frank, you need to get to that salvage yard. I cannot do it from Detroit. I am flying in Thursday, but that is 2 days away. If Serena accelerates her timeline, if she sensed something during that door check, the car could be crushed for scrap before I land. Salvage yards cycle inventory fast. I know. Can you get out? I looked at the narrow window above the water heater. 12 inches of grime-covered glass. Old hinges. A frame set into mortar that was 46 years old. I had helped Nathan replace the weather stripping on that window 5 years ago. I knew the hardware. I knew its weaknesses. I can get out, I said. Tonight. Be careful, Frank. Blake knows how to make deaths look like accidents. If he catches you outside that cellar at 2 in the morning, you will not make it to the salvage yard. You will make it to a ditch on the side of the road, with a convenient story about a confused old man who wandered off in the cold. I am aware of the risk. The dashcam was sitting in a junkyard 3 miles from my house. 3 miles between me and the footage that would put my son's killer behind bars forever. But first, I had to escape a cellar guarded by the man who knew exactly how to make a body look like an accident. Every aircraft has an emergency exit that is not the main door. Overwing hatches. Tail cone releases. Cockpit window escapes designed for the moment the primary exits are blocked by fire or structural collapse. The key is knowing which panel gives way under the right pressure, and which one will trap you tighter if you push wrong. My emergency exit was 12 inches tall and 46 years old. I waited until 1:45. The house above had been silent for 2 hours. Blake's snoring came through the ductwork with the regularity of a metronome, each wet rumble confirming his position in Nathan's bedroom. Serena had taken her own sleep medication. Emma had told me about the white pills. They knocked her out cold until her alarm at 7. I had a 5-hour window. More than enough if everything went right. Barely enough if anything went wrong. I pulled Nathan's toolbox from the shelf with careful hands, wincing as the metal lid creaked. Inside, beneath the top tray where I had found the phone, lay a Phillips head screwdriver, a flathead, and a pair of needle-nose pliers. I selected the flathead and moved toward the window. The basement window sat high on the east wall, just above the water heater. A horizontal rectangle of grime-covered glass, set into a wooden frame that had not been opened in at least a decade. The paint was cracked and yellowed, the putty dried to powder. But the hardware was what mattered. 2 brass hinges on the top edge, 4 Phillips screws each. I had helped Nathan replace the weather stripping on this exact window 5 years ago. I remembered the screws being corroded but not stripped. I remembered the frame having a 16th-inch gap on the left side where the mortar had cracked during a drought summer. I climbed onto the water heater, feeling the metal casing flex slightly under my weight. The heat from the pilot light rose against my legs as I positioned myself at eye level with the frame. My right shoulder protested every movement, the bruise from Blake's shove, now a deep purple continent of pain across my deltoid. I ignored it. Pain is just another instrument reading. It tells you something is wrong, but it does not get to decide whether you fly. The first screw turned with a gritty reluctance, decades of oxidation fighting against the torque. I applied steady pressure, keeping the rhythm slow to minimize sound. In the silence of 2 in the morning, even a small metallic screech could travel through the floor joists. 1 turn. 2. 3. The screw came free, and I caught it in my palm before it could drop onto the water heater casing. 7 more screws, each one a small negotiation between patience and urgency. My fingers cramped around the screwdriver handle. Sweat gathered along my hairline despite the cellar cold. 4 minutes per screw, 32 minutes total. When the last screw pulled free, I gripped the frame and tilted it inward. The November air rushed in like a held breath finally released, carrying the smell of wet mulch and frozen grass. The opening was narrow, 12 inches vertical, perhaps 28 horizontal. I am not a small man. 70 years old, 182 pounds, with the broad shoulders of a pilot who spent decades hauling control columns against hydraulic pressure. I turned sideways, leading with my left arm, and pushed through. The frame bit into my ribs. My injured right shoulder caught the upper edge and a white bolt of pain shot through my chest. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, tasting copper, and forced my torso through the gap. For 3 terrible seconds, I was stuck. Wedged between the window frame and the foundation wall, the cold earth pressing against my face and the cellar darkness pulling at my legs, I exhaled completely, compressing my chest, and with one final push I slid through onto the frozen ground outside. I lay there for 10 seconds, face down in the November mulch, breathing hard and listening. The house loomed above me, dark and silent. No lights flickered on, no doors opened. Blake's snoring continued its muffled rhythm through the upstairs window, undisturbed. I stood, brushed the dirt from my clothes, and oriented myself. East. Eastway Salvage was due east, off Central Avenue, past the railroad tracks and the abandoned textile mill. 3 miles on foot, in dress shoes and a funeral suit that had not been changed in 3 days. In 38-degree air with a wind chill that cut through wool like it was tissue paper. I started walking. The streets of Dilworth at 2 in the morning are empty in a way that feels deliberate. No cars, no dog walkers, just the orange sodium vapor of streetlights casting long shadows on pavement, still wet from an earlier rain. My footsteps echoed off the brick facades of sleeping houses, each step carrying me further from my prison and closer to the evidence that would end this. I kept to the sidewalks for the first mile, then cut through the parking lot of a darkened strip mall to avoid the traffic cameras on Central Avenue. Patricia had warned me. If Serena filed a missing person report, the police would check camera footage. A confused old man wandering the streets at 2 in the morning would confirm every lie she had told about my mental state. I could not afford to be seen. The railroad tracks materialized out of the darkness, twin ribbons of steel reflecting the distant amber glow of the salvage yard's perimeter lights. I crossed them carefully, my dress shoes slipping on the creosote-soaked ties. Beyond the tracks, a chain-link fence topped with sagging barbed wire marked the boundary of Eastway Salvage. The gate was padlocked, but the fence itself was old. I found a section near the southeast corner, where the bottom rail had lifted from the ground, leaving a gap wide enough to crawl through. More dirt, more cold earth against my chest, more pain in my shoulder. But I was through. The salvage yard stretched before me in the dim light. Rows of crushed and broken vehicles, stacked 2 and 3 high in some places, their hollow frames catching the wind like metal bones singing a funeral hymn. The smell was overwhelming, rust and oil and brake fluid, and the faint sweetness of decomposing upholstery. A graveyard for machines that had carried people through the last moments of their lives. I moved through the rows, reading plates and makes in the meager light. Nissan, Honda, Ford, Chevrolet, each wrecked shell, a story I would never know. Then, in the 4th row, near the back fence where the larger vehicles were stored, I saw it. Silver Toyota Camry, 2022 model year. North Carolina plate, that I knew by heart because I had helped Nathan pick it at the DMV. The front end was crumpled inward like a fist had punched through the hood. The driver's side door caved where it had met the concrete barrier on Route 49. The windshield was a spider web of fractured safety glass, still holding its shape but opaque with damage. My son's car, the last place he had been alive. I stood before it in the cold November dark, and for the first time since they locked me in that cellar, I let myself feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. I pressed my palm against the cold metal of the driver's door, and the chill traveled through my hand and into my chest like a current finding ground. The last person to touch this handle from the inside was my son. His fingerprints were probably still embedded in the plastic. Invisible proof of the final moment he reached for the door and found it would not open because the frame had buckled inward on impact. I pulled Nathan's spare key from my pocket. I had carried it on my keychain for 3 years, ever since he gave it to me with a shrug, and the words, "just in case you ever need to move my car from the airport lot." Just in case. The phrase that kept echoing through this nightmare, like a frequency that would not stop transmitting. The passenger door was less damaged. The lock mechanism protested with a grinding reluctance, but it turned. The door swung open, and the smell hit me with physical force. Stale blood, dried and oxidized to a rust-brown sweetness that coated the back of my throat. Deployed airbag chemicals, a sharp talcum bitterness that lingered in the fabric. And underneath both, the fading ghost of Nathan's cologne, the sandalwood scent his daughters used to bury their faces in when he came home from a flight. I gripped the door frame and breathed through my mouth until the wave of grief passed. I leaned inside. The driver's seat was pushed back to Nathan's position, his long pilot's legs requiring maximum track adjustment. The airbag hung deflated from the steering column like a shed skin. Dark stains marked the headrest and the left side of the seatbelt. I did not look at them for long. The rearview mirror. That was my target. I looked up at the rectangular housing mounted to the windshield bracket. At first glance, it appeared standard. Factory issue. A simple reflective surface in a black plastic casing. But Nathan was an engineer's son and a pilot's son. Nothing he built was standard. I reached up and gripped the mirror housing, rotating it slightly. The base was heavier than a normal mirror. I felt along the bottom edge and found a small seam, barely perceptible, where the plastic casing had been modified. A thumbnail-width slot, no larger than a ventilation louver, faced forward through the windshield. Behind it, recessed into the housing, was a lens no bigger than a pencil eraser. I worked my fingers along the mounting bracket and found the release clip Nathan had installed. A quarter turn counterclockwise, a gentle pull, and the mirror separated from the windshield mount. The unit came away in my hands, heavier than it should have been, carrying inside its modified shell the miniature circuit board and micro SD card of a recording device that had been watching the driveway of our colonial home for months. I turned the unit over. On the back panel, concealed behind a thin strip of electrical tape, was a small power button and a status LED. I pressed the button. The LED blinked green twice, then held steady. Still charged. Still functional. The device had been powered down by the impact, but not destroyed. Nathan had built this thing to survive a crash, because he knew a crash was coming. A small LCD screen, no larger than a postage stamp, illuminated on the underside of the housing. I cupped my hands around it, shielding the glow from any distant eyes. The most recent recording file appeared on the display. Time-stamped 11:14 p.m. The night before Nathan's final drive. I pressed play. The footage was infrared. Green-tinged darkness. The resolution was remarkably clear for such a tiny lens. I could see the driveway, the garage door, the front bumper of Nathan's Camry from the perspective of someone sitting in the driver's seat looking forward through the windshield. The timestamp ticked forward in the corner. At 11:17, a shadow entered the frame from the right side. A figure in dark clothing, moving with purpose. The figure crouched at the front of the vehicle, then disappeared from view as it slid beneath the car. For the next 14 minutes, the figure remained under the vehicle. Occasionally, a hand would reach up into frame, adjusting position, retrieving a tool from a belt. At 11:31, the figure slid back out and stood. The infrared caught the face in full profile as the man looked up and down the street, checking for witnesses. Blake Harmon, clear as a photograph. His angular jaw, the scar above his left eyebrow from a bar fight Nathan had once mentioned, the distinctive shaved head that caught the ambient infrared glow like a beacon. He was holding a tool in his right hand, short-handled. The shape was unmistakable to anyone who had spent time around maintenance hangars. Diagonal cutting pliers. He looked directly at the car one final time, a cold professional assessment of his work, then walked off frame toward the street. The timestamp read 11:31 p.m., 13 hours before my son's brakes failed on Route 49. I sat in the passenger seat of my dead son's car, the tiny screen glowing in my cupped hands, and I wept. Not softly. Not with dignity. I wept the way a man weeps when the last lie is finally stripped away and the naked machinery of evil is laid bare. My son knew. He knew Blake was coming for him, and he had turned his own rearview mirror into a witness because he was afraid no one would believe a dead man. I composed myself after 2 minutes. Grief is a luxury, and I was operating on a timetable. I ejected the micro SD card, smaller than my thumbnail, and slid it into the inner pocket of my shirt, directly over my heart. Then I reassembled the mirror housing and placed it in my coat. I would give Patricia the physical unit for chain of custody, but the card stayed with me, against my skin, my son's final testament pressed against the chest that had rocked him to sleep 40 years ago. The walk back took 47 minutes. My legs were stiff, my shoulder burning, my feet numb inside the dress shoes. But I moved faster now. Purpose is a better fuel than fear. I reached the house at 4:11 in the morning. The neighborhood was still dark. I circled to the east side, crouched beside the foundation, and reached for the open window frame. Then I stopped. The window was exactly as I had left it. Hinges removed. Frame tilted inward. But inside the cellar, something had changed. The basement door at the top of the stairs, the one Serena always kept deadbolted from the kitchen side, was slightly ajar. A thin stripe of ambient light leaked down the stairwell from the kitchen above. It had been locked when I left. I was certain of this. I had checked it before climbing out. I lowered myself through the window, my boots touching the concrete with deliberate silence. I stood in the dark, eyes fixed on that sliver of light at the top of the stairs, and listened. Nothing. No breathing. No footsteps. Just the mechanical hum of the house and the faint tick of the kitchen clock bleeding down through the open door. Someone had been in my cellar while I was gone, and they had left the door open behind them. I stood in the dark for a full minute, my eyes locked on that sliver of kitchen light bleeding down the stairwell. Every instinct told me to move, to hide the dash cam, to prepare for confrontation. But a pilot does not react to turbulence by yanking the controls. He holds steady. He reads the instruments. He waits for the shaking to tell him which direction the threat is coming from. I moved silently toward the base of the stairs, keeping my body pressed against the cold block wall. The light from above was faint, the ambient glow of the kitchen nightlight Serena left on for the girls. I listened for 30 seconds. No breathing, no weight shifting on floorboards. The house was asleep. Then I looked down. The concrete floor at the base of the stairs held a thin layer of construction dust that had settled undisturbed for days. Except now, crossing from the bottom step toward my cot and back again, was a set of footprints. Small. Bare. The delicate impression of toes no larger than thimbles. Grace. Not Serena. Not Blake. My other granddaughter had come looking for me in the night. She had unlocked the door from the kitchen side, crept down the stairs, found my cot empty, and retreated. In her fear or confusion, she had forgotten to re-engage the deadbolt from above. The relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. I braced myself against the wall and let the breath I had been holding escape in a long, controlled exhale. Grace had not told anyone. If she had, Blake would have been waiting at the window when I returned. The house would be lit. The alarm would be raised. Instead, the silence confirmed that my 8-year-old granddaughter had carried this secret back to her bed and held it there alone in the dark. I relocked the window frame as best I could, wedging the screws back into their holes by hand. It would not survive close inspection, but it did not need to. I hid the dashcam unit inside the hollow base of the broken humidifier on the metal shelf. The micro SD card stayed in my shirt pocket. Then I lay on the cot and waited for morning. Dawn came gray and heavy through the basement grime. I heard the kitchen alarm chirp at 7, followed by the mechanical routine of Serena's morning. Coffee machine, cabinet doors, the bright performative voice she used when the girls were present. Eat your cereal, girls. Grandpa is resting. He had a bad night. At 7:45, the deadbolt turned and her footsteps descended. I was ready. I sat on the cot with my shoulders hunched, my eyes unfocused, my jaw slack. I let my right hand tremble against my thigh. When she appeared with the tray, I looked up slowly, as if emerging from a deep fog. "Good morning, Frank. How are we today?" She set the tray down, studying me with those forensic eyes. I blinked at her. Twice. Then I said, "Eleanor? Is that you? When did you get back from the store?" A flash of satisfaction crossed her face. Quick. Almost imperceptible. But I caught it. The same micro-expression a predator makes when it sees its prey limping. "It is Serena, Frank. Your daughter-in-law. Remember?" I frowned, rubbing my temples. "Serena. Right. Right. I am sorry. I keep mixing things up." My voice was thin, wandering, perfectly calibrated to match the cognitive profile of a man whose brain was being dissolved by benzodiazepines. "That is okay, Frank. It is perfectly natural. Just eat your breakfast and rest." She lingered longer than usual, her eyes scanning the cellar, looking for what, I did not know, a displaced tool, a footprint she did not expect, evidence of movement. But I had been careful. The dust near the stairs had been smoothed with my palm before she woke. She left. I dumped the oatmeal, drank only water from the utility sink. Then I waited until the house emptied. At 8:30, I heard the front door open and close. Blake's truck rumbled to life and pulled away. Serena was driving the girls to school. I had approximately 40 minutes. I pulled the prepaid phone from its hiding spot and powered it on. 3 bars of signal. I inserted the micro SD card using a thin adapter I had fashioned from a piece of aluminum foil and electrical tape. The phone's media player was primitive, but it could read the file format. I selected the clearest 12 seconds of footage, the moment Blake stood and his face caught the infrared in full profile, and sent it to Patricia via encrypted message. Her response came in 90 seconds. Crystal clear. Blake is finished. Sending to my contact at Charlotte Mecklenburg PD this afternoon. Do not delete anything, I typed back. There is more you need to know. The financial side. Tell me. I relayed what I had overheard through the ductwork. The $680,000 house sale. The $2.5 million insurance payout. Costa Rica. The abandonment of Emma and Grace. Patricia's response took longer this time. When it came, her words carried the weight of a new discovery. Frank, I have been running Serena's financial footprint since Tuesday. I found something. She filed an amendment to Nathan's will 9 days before his death. The original will left everything in trust for the girls with you as executor. The amended version redirects all assets to Serena as sole beneficiary. The amendment was notarized by a mobile notary who visited the house while Nathan was at work. His signature on the amendment does not match his baseline exemplars. Forged, I said. Forged. And there is more. I traced an offshore account opened 6 weeks ago in the Cayman Islands under a shell company called Coastal Horizon LLC. 2 deposits totaling $1.8 million have already been transferred. The routing leads back to Nathan's firm's pension fund, which Serena had access to as his designated financial power of attorney. She was draining him before he died. Systematically. And Frank. I checked the flight bookings. 2 one-way tickets to San Jose, Costa Rica. Departing Charlotte. December 14th. Serena Calloway and Blake Harmon. No minor passengers listed. December 14th. 18 days from now. They were going to drug me into commitment, sell the house out from under my guardianship, collect the insurance, and vanish to a country with no extradition treaty. And my granddaughters would wake up one morning to find every adult in their world simply gone. She was not just planning to steal my son's money. She was planning to abandon his daughters. The woman who braided their hair every morning and kissed them goodnight was going to disappear into a tropical sunset and leave 2 8-year-old girls as orphans. Over my dead body. A good pilot never rushes takeoff. He checks every system twice. He verifies fuel load, control surfaces, emergency equipment, and communication frequencies before the wheels leave the ground. Because once you are airborne, the Earth does not forgive hesitation. You either fly the plan, or the plan flies you into the ground. Patricia arrived in Charlotte on Thursday evening as promised. She did not come to the house. She checked into a hotel on South Boulevard and began assembling the operation from a room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee. I know this because she described it to me during our 2 a.m. call that night, her voice carrying the focused energy of a woman who had spent 30 years building cases from wreckage. I have met with Detective Ray Castillo, she said. Charlotte Mecklenburg homicide. 52 years old. Former Marine. He does not rush, Frank, but when he moves, nothing gets out of the way in time. I showed him the dashcam footage. 14 minutes of Blake under the vehicle, and a clear face shot on exit. What did he say? Patricia paused. I could hear the click of her laptop keyboard in the background, the sound of someone organizing evidence into a sequence. He said it is enough for an arrest warrant on Blake tonight if we want it, but he recommended we wait. He wants Serena on record. On record, how? Castillo's logic is sound. The dashcam proves Blake committed the physical act of sabotage, but it does not directly connect Serena to the conspiracy. She could claim ignorance. She could say Blake acted alone. We both know that is a lie. But a jury needs more than what we know. They need what we can prove. So what does he propose? You give Serena what she wants. You agree to sign the commitment papers. You sit in that living room with her and Blake, and whatever attorney she has hired, and you let her believe she has won. People who believe they have won become careless. They say things they would never say to a man they considered a threat. And when she speaks, Detective Castillo will be listening from a vehicle parked 1 block south on Dilworth Road. Live audio feed from your phone, placed face up on the coffee table with the call connected. I processed this. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Serena's arrogance was her blind spot. She had spent weeks convincing herself that I was a drugged, confused old man, incapable of resistance. She would not expect a trap from someone she considered already defeated. What about the girls? I asked. The question that superseded everything. If this goes wrong, if Blake becomes violent, Emma and Grace cannot be in that house. Already handled, Patricia said. I spoke with Margaret Ewan this afternoon. She is willing to take the girls Saturday morning. A pancake breakfast and a trip to Freedom Park. She will have them out of the house by 8:30. Castillo's team will be in position by 9. Margaret, 72 years old. Our neighbor for 15 years. The woman who brought casseroles after Eleanor died, and who taught Emma how to grow tomatoes last summer. She had not asked Patricia why. She had simply said yes. Some people do not need explanations. They read the frequency of desperation, and they act. The plan crystallized in my mind like ice forming on a wing. Saturday morning, 2 days away. Margaret extracts Emma and Grace under the cover of a normal neighborhood outing. I ascend from the cellar. I sit with Serena and Blake. I perform surrender. And while they celebrate their victory, my phone transmits every incriminating word directly to a detective who has already drafted the arrest warrant and is waiting for the final piece. There was one more element. The laptop. Frank, Patricia continued. I want you to bring Nathan's engineering laptop to the table, the one with the dashcam footage loaded. If Serena denies knowledge, if she plays the innocent widow, you show her the footage. A guilty person cannot watch 14 minutes of their conspiracy partner committing murder without reacting. Her face, her words, her panic will be the confession Castillo needs. And it will all be on audio. I leaned against the cellar wall, the cold concrete steadying me. This was it. The final approach. No go-around, no missed approach. You either land or you crash. There is one risk, I said. Blake. If he panics when he sees the footage, he could become violent. He is 41 years old and 190 pounds. I am 70 with a bruised shoulder. Castillo has a plainclothes officer positioned at the rear of the property, Patricia said. Response time under 15 seconds if the audio indicates physical threat. And Frank, I will be there myself, at the back door. I did not fly to Charlotte to watch from a hotel room. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 6 days, the darkness behind my lids did not feel like a coffin. It felt like the inside of a cockpit before dawn, waiting for clearance, knowing the runway was clear and the weather was holding. I made the call the next morning, Friday, day 6 of my captivity. I waited until Serena brought the breakfast tray, let her see the trembling hands and vacant eyes I had perfected, and then I spoke in the thin, defeated voice of a man who has finally accepted his own decline. Serena, I think you are right. About the facility. About the papers. I am not well. I can feel it getting worse. She froze halfway up the stairs. Then she turned, and the smile she gave me was the most terrifying thing I had seen since the deadbolt first clicked shut. It was triumph. Pure, distilled, absolute triumph. Really, Frank? You are ready? I nodded, letting my head hang. Saturday morning. Let us do it Saturday morning. I just want to sit in the living room one last time, sign the papers at the kitchen table where Eleanor used to do the crossword. Can you give me that? Of course, Frank. Of course. Her voice was honey poured over broken glass. I will have everything ready. You are doing the right thing. The girls will visit you at the facility. I promise. She practically floated up the stairs. I heard her call Blake's name with an excitement she could not contain. He is ready. Saturday. Call the lawyer. I sat in that cellar for the last time, watching the November dawn bleed through the window glass. In 24 hours, either I would walk out of this house a free man, or Serena would walk me into an institution where I would never speak the truth again. The pre-flight was complete. All systems green. Tomorrow, we fly. Before the final approach, a pilot always reviews the flight plan one last time. He traces the route from departure to destination, checking every waypoint, every altitude change, every fuel stop against the reality of what the sky has delivered. The plan is never perfect. Weather shifts. Winds change. But the bones of the plan, the original intent of the person who filed it, those remain readable even after the worst turbulence. I could not sleep. The cellar was silent, except for the mechanical breathing of the furnace and the occasional tick of the water heater cycling. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow would either set me free or bury me. So deep no amount of evidence would matter. And in the hollow space between those two possibilities, my mind did what it always does before a critical flight. It went back to the pre-departure briefing. It went back to Nathan, 3 weeks before Route 49. A Sunday afternoon in late October, the maples along Dilworth Road were burning their final amber, and Nathan had pulled into the driveway unannounced. That was unusual. My son was a planner. He called ahead. He confirmed times. He filed his personal schedule with the same precision he filed his flight plans. An unannounced visit from Nathan Donovan was a deviation that should have triggered every alarm in my pilot's brain. But I was making chili. The house smelled of cumin and paprika, and the Panthers were playing on the kitchen radio, and I was a father who had not yet learned that the last ordinary Sunday is never announced. He came through the back door carrying a cardboard box. I remember the weight of it seemed to bother him, and he set it on the kitchen table with an exhale that carried something heavier than physical effort. Inside the box was a model airplane kit, a Boeing 747. Not a child's snapped-together toy, but a serious hobbyist build. Hundreds of pieces, detailed decals, working landing gear mechanisms. For the girls, he said, pouring himself coffee without being offered. They want to build it with you. He looked at me over the rim of the mug, and his eyes held something I could not read, something that did not match the casual Sunday visit. I told them it is a special project. They keep it safe for Pop-Pop. I remember thinking the phrasing was odd. They keep it safe for me. Not they build it with me. As if the completion was secondary to the preservation. He stayed for 2 hours. Most of that time he spent in the garage. He told me he was checking the oil on my truck, a task I had not asked him to perform. I heard him under the vehicle for a long time, the metallic sounds of tools on steel echoing through the concrete. When he came back inside, his knuckles were dirty, and his expression was drawn. We sat in the living room, the model kit between us on the coffee table. He asked about my health, about my medications, about whether I had updated my will. I told him to stop fussing. I told him I was 70 years old, not 90. He laughed, but the laugh did not reach his eyes. Then, as he was pulling on his jacket by the front door, he turned. The late afternoon light caught his face in profile, and I saw my own father looking back at me through the geometry of his jaw and the deep-set seriousness of his brow. Dad, whatever happens, the girls know where the flight plan is. I frowned. What flight plan? What are you talking about? Just remember. Check the mirror. Always check your mirrors. He smiled then. A real smile, but one that carried the particular sadness of a man who was already looking at something from the other side of goodbye. He hugged me. Not the quick one-armed thing we usually did. A full embrace, both arms, his chin pressing into my shoulder, the way it used to when he was 12, and afraid of something he could not name. "Drive safe," I had said, because that is what fathers say, because we do not know the weight of the words until they become the last ones. He drove away. I went back to my chili. I did not think about the mirror. I did not think about the flight plan. I did not think about why my son had spent 2 hours underneath vehicles that did not need servicing and had hugged me like he was saying goodbye. Now, lying on this cot in the cellar dark, I understood everything. Nathan knew. He knew Serena was planning something. Perhaps he had overheard conversations the way I overheard Blake. Perhaps he had noticed discrepancies in his finances, the pension fund bleeding out, the amended will he never signed. Perhaps he had seen Blake's face in places it should not have been. He was a pilot. He read instruments, and his instruments were screaming. So he did what any good pilot does when he realizes the aircraft is compromised beyond recovery. He did not try to save himself. He built the black box. He installed the dash cam. He left the prepaid phone. He created the model airplane and entrusted it to his daughters with instructions I did not yet fully understand. Keep it safe for Pop. He had flown his last flight knowing the landing gear had been cut. He did not eject. He used his final moments to ensure the black box would survive the crash. He left a trail of breadcrumbs in pilot's language, spoken in a code that Serena would never crack because she did not have wings. She did not know that check the mirror meant the dashcam. She did not know that flight plan meant evidence. She heard a tired man making small talk and dismissed it. But I heard it now. Every syllable, every pause, every weighted glance my son threw across that kitchen table on his last ordinary Sunday. "I am sorry, Nathan," I whispered into the dark. "I am sorry I did not listen sooner. I am sorry you had to build this alone." The furnace clicked in response. The house settled around me, and somewhere above, in Emma's bedroom, a model Boeing 747 sat on a shelf, keeping something safe for Pop that I would not discover until the war was over. But that was for later. Tomorrow was for justice. I closed my eyes and did something I had not done in 7 days. I slept, deeply, completely. The dreamless sleep of a man who has filed his flight plan and committed to the approach. No more revisions. No more second guessing. The runway was ahead, and the only thing left was to fly straight and trust the instruments. My son flew his last flight, knowing the landing gear had been cut. He did not eject. He used his final moments to ensure the black box would survive the crash. And tomorrow morning, I was going to play it for the woman who brought him down. Final approach is the most dangerous phase of any flight. The runway is visible. The destination is certain. But you are committed. There is no going around. No climbing back to altitude. You either land the aircraft on the numbers, or you become a statistic in a government database. Pilots call the last 500 feet the death zone, not because it is inherently lethal, but because it is the point where hesitation becomes catastrophe. Saturday morning broke cold and sharp through the basement window. I had been awake since 5, lying still on the cot, listening to the house come alive above me for the last time from this vantage point. The furnace kicked on at 5:30. The water heater cycled at 6. At 6:45, I heard Margaret Yuen's minivan pull into the driveway, the familiar rattle of her engine, a sound I had heard 1,000 times through open summer windows. I moved to the basement window and pressed my face against the grime. Through the narrow glass, I could see the driveway at a low angle. Margaret stood beside her van in a heavy coat, her silver hair catching the weak November sun. She waved toward the front porch, and a moment later 2 small figures emerged, Emma and Grace, matching winter coats but mismatched scarves. Emma walked quickly, her chin up, her eyes scanning the street with that hypervigilance she had developed since Nathan's death. Grace moved slower, her hand trailing along the porch railing, looking back toward the house with an expression that broke something in my chest. They climbed into Margaret's van, the door slid shut, the engine engaged, and as the van pulled away from the curb, I watched until the red of the taillights disappeared around the corner of Dilworth Road. My granddaughters were safe. Whatever happened in the next 2 hours, they would not be in this house. I exhaled. The breath came out shaking, carrying 7 days of compressed terror. One life preserved. Now, for the rest. At 8:55, the deadbolt turned. Serena's footsteps descended the stairs, with a lightness I had not heard from her before. She was practically dancing. I sat on the cot, my shoulders hunched, my face arranged into the vacant surrender I had been rehearsing for 2 days. "Good morning, Frank." She appeared at the bottom of the stairs wearing a fitted black dress, as if this were a business closing rather than the institutional commitment of a human being. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was precise. She had dressed for a victory photo. "Ready to come upstairs? Everything is prepared. It will be quick and painless, I promise." I stood slowly, performing the stiffness of a man who had spent a week on a camping cot, which I had. But I let the pain show more than necessary. I leaned on the railing as I climbed the stairs, one hand gripping the wood, the other hanging limp at my side. Serena watched from above, her satisfied smile widening with each labored step. The kitchen hit me with a wall of warmth and light. After 7 days in the concrete twilight of the cellar, the November sun pouring through the breakfast windows was almost blinding. I squinted, steadying myself against the doorframe. The house smelled of fresh coffee and furniture polish she had cleaned. Staged the scene for whoever might ask later how the commitment had gone. "Through here, Frank." Serena guided me with a hand on my elbow, her touch light and proprietary. "The living room is more comfortable." I shuffled into the living room, and there they were. Blake Harmon sat in Nathan's leather armchair, his legs spread wide in a posture of territorial dominance. He wore a button-down shirt, the first time I had seen him in anything but construction wear, playing civilized for the occasion. Beside him on the couch sat a man I did not recognize, mid-40s, gray suit, thin-framed glasses, a leather portfolio open on his lap, revealing a stack of legal documents with yellow signature tabs protruding from the edges. "Frank, this is attorney David Whitfield," Serena said, gesturing to the suited man as if introducing a dinner guest. "He is here to help with the transition. Just a few signatures, and we can get you the care you need." Whitfield looked uncomfortable. He offered a weak handshake without standing, his eyes not quite meeting mine. A hired gun. The kind of lawyer who asks no questions because the answers might compromise his fee. I lowered myself into Eleanor's old wingback chair, positioned directly across from the coffee table. The commitment papers lay fanned across the glass surface. I could read the headers from here. Petition for involuntary psychiatric evaluation. Designation of temporary guardian. Transfer of financial power of attorney. Each document, a nail in a coffin. Serena had been building for weeks. My phone sat in my jacket pocket, already connected to Detective Castillo's line. Every word in this room was traveling 1 block south to a surveillance van where a homicide detective was recording with equipment that could pick up a whisper in a hurricane. Serena settled onto the arm of Blake's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. The gesture was casual, intimate, and deliberately performed for my benefit. She wanted me to see it. She wanted the confused old man to understand exactly who owned this house now. "Take your time, Frank," she said. "I know this is difficult, but it is for the best. You are not well. The episodes are getting worse. The girls are frightened." I reached for the pen she had placed beside the documents. My hand trembled. Not performance this time. Real. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made fine motor control nearly impossible. I touched the pen to the first signature line and held it there. Then I stopped. I set the pen down on the glass table with a small, deliberate click. I looked up at Serena, then at Blake, then at the lawyer who was already avoiding eye contact. "Before I sign anything, Serena," I said, my voice shifting from the confused mumble to something flat and hard and cold, "I would like to show you something my son left for me." I reached beside the wingback chair where I had placed Nathan's engineering laptop bag that morning, hidden beneath the chair skirt during my slow shuffle from the kitchen. I set the laptop on the coffee table, opened the lid, and turned the screen to face them. Serena's smile did not disappear immediately. It froze, held in place by the inertia of her confidence, the absolute certainty that the man before her was too broken to fight back. I clicked play. The screen flickered to life with the green-tinged clarity of infrared night vision. The timestamp read 11:14 p.m. in the upper right corner. The driveway of our colonial home materialized on the display, rendered in the ghostly palette of a surveillance feed. The front bumper of Nathan's silver Camry dominated the foreground, and beyond it, the dark geometry of the garage door and the sleeping street. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. The image was still as a photograph. Then, at 11:17, a shadow entered from the right side of the frame. I watched Serena's face, not the screen. I already knew what the footage contained. I had memorized every second of it in the cellar dark. What I needed now was her reaction. Her face was the instrument panel I was reading, and every micro-expression was a gauge telling me the exact altitude of her collapse. The shadow on screen crouched beside the front wheel well. Then it slid beneath the vehicle with the practiced fluidity of a man who had done this before. Blake's shape disappeared under the Camry, leaving only the occasional flash of movement visible beneath the chassis. Serena's frozen smile lasted exactly 4 seconds into the footage. Then it began to crack. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It dissolved the way ice dissolves in warm water, starting at the edges and working inward until the entire structure lost cohesion. Her lips parted. Her pupils dilated. The carefully constructed mask of the concerned daughter-in-law slid away and revealed something raw and reptilian underneath. Blake reacted differently. He leaned forward in Nathan's armchair, his body going rigid, his hands gripping the leather armrests with enough force to leave finger impressions. His eyes darted from the screen to me, and back, the calculation of a cornered animal, assessing the distance to every exit. On screen, 14 minutes had elapsed. The figure slid out from beneath the vehicle and stood. The infrared caught his face in full profile as he scanned the street. The angular jaw, the shaved head, the scar above the left eyebrow. Blake Harmon, holding diagonal cutting pliers in his right hand, standing over the car he had just condemned to failure. "Turn it off." Serena's voice came out as a hiss, thin and sharp as a pressure leak in a cabin wall. "That is not real. That is fabricated. He is insane." She pointed at me, her finger trembling. "You made that. You are delusional, Frank. Dr. Morrison said you were capable of paranoid constructions." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. A captain's authority comes from stillness, not volume. "This is Nathan's dashcam, Serena. He installed it in his rearview mirror because he knew what was coming. He built it to survive the crash. And it did." Attorney Whitfield was already on his feet. The color had drained from his face like fuel from a ruptured tank. He closed his portfolio with a snap and took 2 full steps backward toward the hallway. "I am not a party to this," he said, his voice cracking on the final word. "I was told this was a standard commitment proceeding." He looked at Serena, then at Blake, then at the door. "Whatever this is, I was never here." He retreated into the hallway, and I heard the front door open and close with the speed of a man fleeing a fire. Blake stood. The armchair rocked backward from the force of his movement. His face had shifted from shock to something more dangerous. A cornered animal does not calculate escape routes. It calculates attack angles. "That is fake," Blake said, his voice low and thick with menace. He took a step toward me. "You are a sick old man playing with video software. Give me that laptop." I pulled the laptop toward my chest, closing the lid halfway. Blake lunged forward, his hand reaching for the screen. I pivoted left, using the wingback chair as a barrier between us. The coffee table caught his shin, and he stumbled, his weight crashing against the glass surface. The commitment papers scattered across the floor like dead leaves. Serena was screaming now. Not words, just sound. A high keening frequency of someone watching their entire architecture of lies collapse in real time. She grabbed a glass vase from the mantel and raised it above her head, her eyes wild and locked on the laptop. Then I spoke the words that ended everything. "This is a live stream, Serena." I said it calmly. The way I would announce a missed approach to 200 passengers. No panic. No drama. Just the facts of the new reality. Detective Ray Castillo, of Charlotte Mecklenburg Homicide, has been listening to every word in this room for the last 15 minutes. Everything you have said is on record. Everything Blake just tried to do is on record. The vase lowered by 2 inches. Her eyes went to my jacket pocket where the phone sat face up, its screen faintly glowing with an active call timer. 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Long enough to capture Blake's implicit admission. Long enough to capture Serena's failure to deny. "You are bluffing," she whispered. But the conviction was gone. I could hear it leaking from her voice like pressure from a compromised fuselage. Blake did not wait to find out. He dropped all pretense of bravado and bolted, not toward the front door where he might be seen from the street, but toward the kitchen and the back exit. His boots hammered against the hardwood, with the frantic rhythm of a man who has realized too late that every escape route has been mapped. I heard him reach the back door, heard the deadbolt snap open, heard the door swing wide on its hinges, and then I heard the voice that meant this flight was finally over. Patricia's voice, clear as a radio transmission on a windless day, cut through the cold November air from the other side of that door. "Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. Step away from the door. Hands where I can see them." Now, Blake's boots stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. The sound of a man realizing that the runway he was aiming for had been closed before he ever took off. The back door did not open quietly. It was breached. The heavy oak swung inward with the force of trained shoulders behind it, and the cold November morning poured into the kitchen carrying the sound of boots, radio static, and the metallic authority of drawn weapons. I heard Blake before I saw what happened. A single strangled sound, halfway between a curse and a whimper, followed by the heavy thud of a body being driven against the kitchen wall. The cabinet doors rattled. A coffee mug fell from the counter and shattered against the tile. Then Patricia's voice again, calm and controlled, cutting through the chaos like an approach frequency through static. "Hands behind your back. Do not resist." Blake did not resist. The sound that came from him was something I had never heard from a man who once stood over me with the casual violence of a predator. It was the wet, broken noise of a human being realizing that his entire life had just been reduced to a set of charges read from a laminated card. In the living room, Serena had not moved. She stood by the mantel, the crystal vase still in her hand, lowered to her side like a forgotten prop from a play that had ended mid-scene. Her face was the color of the commitment papers scattered across the floor, white, bloodless. The face of someone watching the ocean pull back before the wave arrives. 2 uniformed officers entered from the kitchen hallway, their movements efficient and coordinated. Detective Ray Castillo followed behind them. He was exactly as Patricia had described. Mid-50s, square-shouldered, a face like weathered stone that had seen too many crime scenes to be surprised by one more. He surveyed the living room with the unhurried assessment of a man who had already won, and was now simply collecting what was owed. "Serena Calloway Donovan," he said. His voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, just the flat procedural weight of inevitability. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree." The vase slipped from her fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and exploded into fragments that scattered across the room like shrapnel. The sound broke something inside her. Not remorse, not guilt, something structural. The load-bearing wall of her arrogance finally giving way under the weight of a reality she could no longer redesign. She screamed. Not at Castillo, not at me. At Blake, whose face appeared in the kitchen doorway, held upright between 2 officers with his wrists cuffed behind his back. "You were supposed to handle the car." Her voice cracked open, raw and hysterical, and stripped of every mask she had ever worn. "I only did the insurance. I only did the paperwork. You said it would be clean. You said nobody would ever look twice." The officers froze for half a second. Castillo did not. He looked at me, and I saw the faintest shadow of grim satisfaction cross his stone face. She had just done the one thing every detective dreams of. She had confessed her role in a panic, drawing a clear line between her conspiracy and Blake's execution of the physical act. In front of 6 witnesses, and a recording that was still transmitting. "Ma'am," Castillo said, stepping forward, "you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise it." But Serena was beyond strategy. The architecture of her self-control had collapsed entirely, and the rubble was pouring out of her in a torrent. She kept screaming at Blake as the officers guided her hands behind her back. The cold click of the handcuffs was barely audible beneath her voice, but I heard it. I heard it. The way you hear the landing gear lock into place after a flight you were not sure would end on the ground. Blake, for his part, was already negotiating his surrender. His bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by the frantic, self-preserving calculus of a man who understood that silence was no longer an option but that cooperation might be. "She planned everything," he said, his voice rapid and thin. "The insurance, the will, the offshore accounts. She found me. She recruited me. I will give you everything, every name, every transaction. Just keep her away from me." Serena heard him. The scream that came from her then was not human. It was the sound of a partnership built on murder dissolving in real time, each half racing to throw the other under the wheels of justice. Castillo ignored them both. He walked to where I sat in Eleanor's wingback chair, my hands resting on the laptop lid, my pulse finally beginning to slow from its 7-day sprint. "Mr. Donovan," he said quietly, "are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" I shook my head. "I need my porch, detective. I need to stand on my own porch." He nodded, a single respectful dip of the chin. "Take your time, sir." I stood on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and walked to the front door. I passed Serena, pinned between 2 officers, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. She turned her head toward me as I passed, and for the last time, I looked into the eyes of the woman who had murdered my son and tried to erase me from existence. "You were supposed to be too old and too broken to fight back," she hissed through clenched teeth. I stopped, turned, looked at her with the steady calm of a man who had landed in worse weather than this. "Pilots do not retire from survival, Serena. We just wait for the right runway." I walked through the front door and onto the porch. The November air hit my face like a baptism. Cold, clean, sharp with the smell of frozen earth and dead leaves. I gripped the wooden railing with both hands and breathed. In and out. In and out. The rhythm of a man remembering what it feels like to exist above ground. The squad car sat in the driveway, its lights cycling blue and red against the bare oak trees. I watched as they loaded Blake into the back seat first, his head bowed, his mouth still moving in silent negotiation with whatever god he thought might listen. Then Serena. She did not bow her head. She stared straight forward with the hollow, fixed gaze of a woman who had finally run out of masks to wear. The car pulled away from the curb. The lights faded around the corner of Dilworth Road, and the street went quiet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with hands that were shaking now, the adrenaline crash finally arriving like delayed turbulence after a rough descent. Patricia's message glowed on the screen. 3 words. Knoxville case reopened. Blake was not just Nathan's killer. He was a serial predator who had been operating in plain sight for half a decade, and my son's black box had just grounded him forever. The hardest landing is not the emergency one. It is the one where you taxi back to the gate and shut down the engines and sit in the silence of the cockpit knowing that everyone behind you is alive because of decisions you made at 300 miles per hour. The adrenaline leaves your body like fuel from a dump valve, and what remains is a hollow, shaking vessel that needs to learn how to be still again. The 2 weeks following the arrest moved in a strange, underwater rhythm. Time did not feel linear. It felt like holding patterns, circles that covered the same ground but at slightly different altitudes, each pass revealing something new in the wreckage below. The forensic lab at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg crime facility completed their analysis of Nathan's brake line on day 9. Patricia called me with the results, her voice carrying the clinical satisfaction of a woman whose hypothesis had been confirmed under a scanning electron microscope. The cut surface displayed a lateral compression pattern consistent with 45-degree application of industrial diagonal cutting pliers. No natural degradation. No corrosion fatigue. The crystalline structure at the shear point showed instantaneous mechanical separation, not progressive failure. The metallurgist's report used a phrase that I will carry for the rest of my life. This is not a failure. This is an execution. Blake's plea deal came 3 days later. Facing the dashcam footage, Serena's recorded confession, and the forensic confirmation, his attorney advised immediate cooperation. Blake gave them everything: names, dates, financial routing numbers, and the locations of burner phones he had used to coordinate with Serena. He confirmed the Knoxville murder of Curtis Dellinger in 2019, and he added a third: a man named Paul Weston in Birmingham, Alabama, 2016. Same method. Mountain Road. Brake failure. Case closed as mechanical. Paul Weston's widow had moved to Miami with Blake 7 weeks after the funeral. 3 victims across 3 states, over 8 years. Blake Harmon was not a man who had made a terrible mistake. He was an industry. A franchise of engineered death operating beneath the radar of local law enforcement, who never thought to cross-reference brake failures across state lines. The trial lasted 11 days. I sat in the front row of courtroom 4 at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, wearing the same suit I had worn to Nathan's funeral because it felt like the only appropriate uniform for watching justice finally catch up to the woman who made that funeral necessary. Patricia sat beside me. Margaret sat behind us. Emma and Grace stayed with Margaret's sister during proceedings. They did not need to hear what was said in that room. Serena's defense attorney attempted every maneuver available. He argued coercion. He argued diminished capacity. He argued that Blake had manipulated a vulnerable woman into compliance. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Insurance fraud. Elder abuse. Attempted murder of a dependent adult. Forgery. Wire fraud. Judge Catherine Morales delivered the sentence on a Thursday morning in late February. 35 years without the possibility of parole. Serena stood motionless as the words were read. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply stared at a point somewhere above the judge's head, as if she had already left the room and only her body remained. Blake received life without parole. 3 counts of first-degree murder across 3 jurisdictions. The FBI coordinated the multi-state prosecution, and Patricia's testimony as an expert witness in crash reconstruction was cited in the appellate court's denial of his appeal. The house took longer to heal than the legal system. I began the renovation on the first day of March. Patricia stayed for 4 weeks, helping me dismantle the infrastructure of Serena's occupation. We ripped out the carpet she had chosen, stripped the wallpaper she had hung, removed every fixture, every lamp, every piece of furniture that carried her fingerprint. The house needed to forget her before it could remember us. Emma and Grace moved back into their bedroom on a Sunday afternoon in mid-March. I had repainted it lavender, their favorite color, and hung new curtains that caught the spring light. Grace placed her stuffed animals in a precise row along the windowsill. Emma pinned a photograph of Nathan in his captain's uniform above her bed. They did not ask about their mother. Not yet. That conversation would come. But it would come on their timeline, not mine. Margaret brought dinners 3 nights a week for the first month. Casseroles and soups, and the kind of heavy, warming food that teaches a grieving house how to smell like a home again. She never asked for thanks. She simply appeared at the back door with aluminum foil and a purpose. The spring came slowly to Charlotte that year. The dogwoods bloomed late, and the mornings carried a chill well into April. But the house was warming from the inside. I could feel it in the way the girls' laughter began to fill the hallways again. Tentative at first, then louder, then constant. The frequency of a home, finding its resonance after a long silence. I was in the living room on a Saturday afternoon in late April, painting the last wall a clean, warm white, when I heard footsteps running down the upstairs hallway. Fast, excited. Not the footsteps of fear. The footsteps of discovery. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face flushed and her eyes enormous. Behind her, Grace stood holding something in both hands, something large and familiar. A model Boeing 747, the one Nathan had brought to my house that last Sunday. The one he had given to his daughters with instructions I had not understood until now. Pop, pop. Grace's voice was breathless with the weight of her delivery. She held the model forward, and I could see that the fuselage had been separated along a seam I had never noticed. The belly of the aircraft was hollow. We opened it. Daddy said to open it when you told us it was safe. I set down the paint roller. My hands were trembling. Not from age. Not from fear. From the sudden, absolute certainty that my son was still speaking to me from the other side of the grave, and he had saved his most important words for last. I took the model from Grace's hands the way you take a newborn, with reverence, with the understanding that what you are holding is more fragile and more important than anything your hands have ever carried. The separation seam ran along the belly of the fuselage, hidden by a magnetic latch only a pilot's son would think to engineer. Inside, nested in cotton padding, were two objects: a USB drive wrapped in wax paper, and a folded letter on Nathan's cream-colored stationery, the linen paper Eleanor had given him for his 30th birthday. I sent the girls upstairs. Then I plugged the USB into Nathan's laptop and opened the single video file. Nathan's face filled the screen. Healthy. Strong. His brown eyes clear but carrying a weight that did not match the man I thought I knew. He took a breath, and then he spoke. Dad, if you are watching this, it means I did not make it. And it means you did. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry for the distance these last few months. But I had to make sure you were never a target. If she knew I had told you, she would have come for you first. I could not protect the girls and protect you at the same time. So I chose silence. And I hope you can forgive me for that. He looked away from the camera, composing himself with the same jaw-set determination I recognized from my own mirror. I know about Serena and Blake. I know about the insurance policies. I installed cameras. I installed the dash cam. I left you the phone. Everything is designed to survive whatever happens to me. Because I know you, Dad. You are a pilot. You do not leave the cockpit until every passenger is safe. He leaned closer. Tears he was no longer hiding caught the light. The girls are my flight plan, Dad. You are their captain now. Take them somewhere safe. Teach them to be brave. And tell them every day that their father loved them more than anything that has ever existed in this world. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of my living room and wept. I wept for the son who faced his own death with the courage of a man filing his final flight plan. I wept for the father who failed to hear the mayday hidden inside casual conversation. And I wept with gratitude for a God who kept me alive long enough to honor the mission my son entrusted to me. The letter explained everything. The affair he discovered 4 months before his death. The financial discrepancies. His fear that Blake was dangerous. His decision to build a record rather than confront. Because confrontation meant a custody battle against a woman willing to destroy. I should have told you sooner, he wrote. But a good pilot does not declare an emergency until he has exhausted every other option. I thought I could land this myself. I was wrong. Forgive me, Dad, and fly them home safe. I folded the letter into my flight logbook. The last entry of a career spanning 4 decades and 2 generations of Donovan pilots. The Nathan Donovan Memorial Aviation Scholarship was established in June. Full funding for 1 student per year from a single-parent household to attend flight school. Patricia handled the legal structure. Margaret organized the first fundraiser. Emma designed the logo, a 747 silhouette against a setting sun. I believe God places us in the storms we are meant to survive, so that we can guide others through the turbulence that follows. I believe He kept my eyes open in that cellar when the drugs should have closed them. And I believe He gave my son the courage to build a black box that would outlast his own heartbeat. It was a Sunday morning in late May when we took the walk. The trail behind our neighborhood leads to a hill, overlooking the approach path into Charlotte Douglas International. The girls ran ahead, their sneakers kicking up red Carolina clay, their laughter filling the warm spring air. I followed at my own pace, feeling the sun on my face and the solid earth beneath my feet. No cellar walls, no deadbolts, no chemical fog between me and the world. We sat on the bench at the top of the hill, watching aircraft descend in long, graceful arcs. A 747 appeared on the horizon, its silver fuselage catching the morning light. Emma pointed toward the sky. That is Daddy flying, pop pop. I put my arm around her. Grace leaned against my other side, her hand finding mine. Yeah, sweetheart. That is Daddy flying. We sat there until the sun was high, watching the planes come home. And for the first time in 7 months, the sky did not look like a threat. It looked like a promise filed by the people we love, charted through storms they knew we would face, leading us toward a runway they cleared before they had to leave. Looking back on everything, this story was never just about murder or money or revenge. It was about blindness. I spent 35 years reading instruments at 37,000 feet, yet I missed the most important distress signal my own son ever sent. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Listen when the people you love speak in codes you do not understand. Pay attention sooner. Speak up sooner. Guard your home, your heart, and the people who cannot yet guard themselves. Evil hides behind familiar faces, but courage rebuilds what betrayal burns. God watches over the broken places, even in the darkest cellars, even when every instrument goes dark. If this story reached something inside you, share your thoughts in the comments. If you have survived your own storm, tell me about it. You are not alone in the turbulence. And if this moved you, subscribe so you will not miss the next story. Everyone is a black box recovered from the wreckage, carrying a truth worth hearing. Thank you for staying until the end. Clear skies ahead.